Hi, I'm Matt Jackson working with Gym Club Solutions, and today we're going to be filming a video tutorial on how to develop handstand on rings. Okay, we're going to start looking at some of the basic progressions for handstand development on rings. Again, we're going to start using parallettes on the floor, so we're not even touching the rings at this point. What we're trying to do is achieve the good understanding of the gymnast's head position, the angle that the rings are going to be turned out at. So by using a set of V-shaped parallettes today, we can simulate the direction that we want the rings to be turned out, making sure that when the gymnast does develop a handstand on rings, that their elbows are not touching the cables, which is going to be really important later on for the gymnast development. So we're going to start on the floor parallettes, okay, and we're going to look at, again, the bars are angled in a V shape purposely for this reason, so the rings will be turned this way. Also, we're going to look at what the gymnast's head is doing. So when you're on rings, the rings will be free moving. So what we need to do is create a small shoulder angle by lifting the chin up and slightly closing the shoulders so we can stabilize the rings and stopping a static handstand. If the gymnast's head moves in, the rings will move very freely and then the gymnast will pass through handstand. So we're going to try and understand this stage on the floor first. So when the gymnast is in handstand, we want to see the chin lifted, a small shoulder angle and the bars turned out, so we can try and find this position and find stability in that shape. When developing the handstand on rings, it's really nice to try different exercises. So to strengthen the gymnast's shoulder strength and look at angles where they're going to be having resistance against the body when they get to handstand, as we said, the rings cables are free moving. So we're going to have movement from side to side and forwards and backwards. So what we're going to try and do today is we're going to use some laminated sheets on the floor and try and get the gymnast to move the sheets in and out, focusing on developing their front delts and their shoulders, which is going to feel the same as if the cables were moving when they're in handstand. Okay, so the cables are going to go out with the laminated sheets and then slide back in. So the gymnast actually has to work quite hard to open then close the sheets, feeling like the cables would be moving in and out when they're in handstand on rings. Okay, so moving on to another progression that we can use for developing the shoulder strength for the gymnast when they're in handstand. Today we're going to use a set of parallettes in the setup that we've got today. So in your gym clubs you may have small dumbbells or ankle weights, anything that they can hold safely above their head to start developing the movements that we want to see in handstand. So we're going to look at two exercises. We're going to look at one where the gymnast is going to open and close their shoulder angle, and one where they're going to make circular motions. All of these will be different forces that the gymnast will have to work against when they're in handstand on the rings. So the first one we're going to look at is moving forwards and backwards with a shoulder angle. So again, the gymnast is going to have their chin slightly lifted and they're going to use the parallette to work through that range of movement through their shoulders. Again, when you're doing this, you can do multiple repetitions of this, maybe 10, 15, 20 repetitions until they can really feel it working in their shoulders. Okay, again, working on development of handstand on rings, what we want to really do is develop the shoulder strength of the gymnasts. So when they're lifting into handstand, they've got good control of the rings. So today we're going to look at another exercise we can do to build the strength. We're going to use an elastic for this exercise. Today we've put it around a P-bar upright, but it could be around any upright that you've got in the gym that you're working in. Okay, and we're going to look at opening and closing the shoulder angles and making the circular motions. Again, both simulating movements that we're going to get within the rings when we're working to hold a handstand on rings. So first we're going to look at opening and closing the shoulder angle. So the gymnast has to work hard to keep their body still. Their chin will still be slightly elevated and they're going to work in that motion forwards and backwards as if the cables were moving around in handstand. Okay, when developing the handstand on rings, we're now going to try a different exercise. So today we're going to use a stack of mats underneath the rings to build up the floor underneath. So what we want the rings to do is be almost touching the floor. So the gymnast's knuckles will rest against the mat, giving us a little bit more stability with the rings. The gymnast can also put their feet on the cables to add a bit of stability. And then what we're going to try and get the gymnast to do is keep the rings rotated and slowly take their feet off the cables into handstand and back onto the cables. This is going to give the gymnast the start of the understanding of holding the handstand, but with just a little bit of help from the mat and the cable. Okay, we're now going to move on to another progression for the handstand development on rings. So before, in the previous prep, we had the mat with the gymnast's knuckles touching to give them a bit of stability. Now we've taken away a mat, but we're going to use an elastic band. So the band is going to be between the gymnast's hands to limit the amount of range of movement of the rings. So this makes it slightly easier for the gymnast to hold handstand, as the rings can't move around quite as much. So we're now going to try this with the gymnast and show the difference between the one with the knuckles and now one with using a band. There's another layer we can add in and progression for handstand development on rings. We're now going to let the gymnast kick to handstand with their feet on the cables, and then the gymnast is going to move the cables in and out, again developing the movement of the rings that we're going to feel when we're in handstand. All these external forces we need to be able to work against and understand how to control when we're actually developing our handstand. So when we do finally finish the handstand, we're in a nice consolidated handstand, but we also understand all of the forces and how to control everything when we're in handstand. So we're now going to support the gymnast, and I'm going to hold the rings for the gymnast to give them a guide of where the rings are going to be moving in and out. And then by doing this, this will give the gymnast an understanding of what they need to do to control the handstand if the rings are moving in and out when they're trying to develop their handstand. So gymnast will kick to handstand. Feet will go again on the cables. Okay, the rings will be turned here. Okay, and we want the gymnast to feel this movement. So the rings are going to come slightly away and then in. We're now going to look at how to stabilize the gymnast's handstand. So when we're developing a handstand on rings, normally it will come from a press to handstand, an inlocation or a dislocation to handstand, or a long swing. So when the gymnast arrives in handstand, they need to be able to understand how to control the rings and stabilize themselves in handstand. So on this preparation, I'm going to hold the rings for the gymnast. When they take their feet off the cables, I'm going to help them stabilize their handstand and hold the balance when they're on the rings. Okay, so now we're going to make the progression slightly harder. When doing this final preparation, I'm going to then give the gymnast a bit of swing so the rings are actually moving a lot more. And again, the gymnast will have their feet on the cables, take them off, trying to hold the handstand, and I'll guide the gymnast with the rings, stabilizing them underneath. Okay, this is really important for when you develop the handstand for later on, when you're finishing skills that arrive in handstand from a swing, to be able to control your handstand on the rings. Okay, so we're now on the final progression for handstand on rings. So we're gonna let the gymnast try it again on their own. They're gonna have their feet on the cables first, and then we're gonna look at seeing the stability when they take their feet off the cables, trying to keep the rings turned, their head position, and trying to hold the handstand now on their own. Again, we've got a block and soft safety mats underneath, so if the gymnast does pass over the top, they're nice and safe. Thanks for watching our video tutorial today on how to develop handstand on rings. Please use some of the preparations that we've used in the video. If you've got any other ideas, you can add things into your program. All of the preparations we used today have been built in gyms using different pieces of apparatus. So use what you've got in your gyms and use the prep safely and develop things over time. Don't rush to be able to do handstand on rings. It takes a long time to develop. So using these preparations, you should have all of the key points that we want to be: where to look, how to hold it, what position the body should be in, where the ring should be turned, and how to develop a good stable handstand.